Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tom Fuller. I'm the Communications Manager for the Oregon Department of Transportation. And today we are here to get an introduction to the Climate Office. And joining us is Amanda Pietz and some of her crew. And what we wanted to encourage you to do so as well is to ask questions. And we have available to you Slido, which hopefully you can see it on your screen. We are, Amanda, if you want to share your content again, you can probably just see Amanda up on the screen here.
Sure, it looks like you might have to hand it over to me again, Tom.
Oh yeah, I sure do, you bet. Handing it back to you. Oops, there we go. Okay. I wanted to talk a little bit about where you can ask questions, and that is to go to slido.com and then type in the event code, and I believe it is case sensitive, so that's Climate June 2020. You can ask your own questions, or you can vote on questions you'd like to have answered most, and then that will kind of move them up and down on the list that we see. So we'll have the presentation, and then we will go through the questions that you have and hopefully provide as many answers as you can. So I have had the opportunity to talk to Amanda and Jeff and some of the folks in the office, really excited about what they're doing, the approach that they're using. So I think this is going to be a really, really educational and a really inspiring webinar. So Amanda, with that, I am going to turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Tom. And good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this first briefing that we're having on the ODOT Climate Office, where we'll spend a little bit of time talking about the Climate Office itself, what our charge is, and some of the major work efforts that we have going on. I've been with ODOT a little over a dozen years. I've been the statewide planning manager, so I created policies for across transportation modes and different topics. And then most recently, I was the manager over active transportation and multimodal investment program. I'm really excited to be taking on this opportunity, which is both challenging and exciting. But we formed a new climate office. And the reason that we've done that is because we've recognized, and really our frontline staff even has seen a change on our transportation system. We're seeing more wildfires out there, more frequent landslides, especially along our Oregon coasts, and flooding in all parts of the state. The picture shown here is in Eastern Oregon along Interstate 84 for recent floodings that we had earlier this year. And as you see in the photo, that these events have major impacts on the transportation system. And more importantly, they have major impacts on people's ability to reach critical services and on the statewide economy. When the roads are closed, people can't get to stores, can't get to houses, goods aren't moving and shipping, so it's affecting the statewide economy. So there's a lot of different impacts that we're seeing from these transportation events. So we formed the Climate Office to help understand what's changing in the climate, what these extreme weather events look like, and how we can adapt and make the system more resilient. We also recognize that transportation is responsible for the highest pollution in the state of Oregon. That greenhouse gas emissions from transportation represent about 40% of all emissions in the state, and really affect our overall air quality from the exhaust on cars and trucks. So this is something that we know we need to address, and we're looking for ways that we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions and really follow our statewide transportation strategy, which I'll talk about in a minute, which is our way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and also to comply with the governor's executive order on climate change that came out earlier this year. The Climate Office is pretty small right now, so we have 4 staff, and really that's around 3 to 4 because we have folks working on other efforts as well. But these are the focus areas of the group. Mitigation and adaptation, like I talked about in the introduction slides, are things that we're focused on, as well as sustainability, and that's making sure that we're really being thoughtful on our consumption of goods, energy, and some of those kinds of resources as well. Focusing first on mitigation, so that's ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from transportation. As I mentioned, we have a statewide transportation strategy. That's a roadmap for carbon reductions from transportation in Oregon. It was completed in 2013, and it helps the state to reach its greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. It looks at all movements of people on the system, including the movement of people in the air, on the ground, and the movement of freight on all transportation modes. When we looked at ways to reduce emissions, we found that there's no one silver bullet. One of the most effective approaches is trying to affect every mile driven and reducing the carbon footprint there. So vehicle and fuel efficiency is about half of the solution. But again, it's not the only solution. We need conducive land uses so that people are able to walk and bike and use lower carbon modes. We need to have an efficient system. And then we can look at opportunities for pricing the system as well. So it's really a mix of things in order to reduce emissions from transportation. We completed the strategy in 2013, and in 2018, a few years ago, we took a look to see how are we doing. What we found is that we've actually increased emissions in transportation in the short term, with a projected decrease long term, given some of our good land use policies, investments in public transportation, and the like. But there's a significant gap between the statewide transportation strategy vision and where we're heading in the future. So we need to make some changes. A big part of closing that gap is what was laid out by the Governor Kate Brown in early March. So she released Executive Order 2004 on climate, directing several state agencies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and start to consider climate in all aspects of their business. So for ODOT, there's three main specific requirements. The first of which is looking at infrastructure charging needs for electric vehicles. The second is adding a greenhouse gas reduction lens to project selection. So really, how do we think about the impacts of if a project might increase or decrease greenhouse gas emissions? And lastly, to, again, integrate things into everything that we do, how we plan, invest, and consider greenhouse gas emissions. And consistent with the executive order, the Climate Office is really set up to add that greenhouse gas reduction lens to the work we do. And I say lens purposely, that there's a lot of things that the agency has to balance, safety, equity, the economy, but we want to make sure we're explicitly balancing the environment as well and making concerted decisions on trying to reduce emissions and trying to adapt to the changes of climate and weather. So our effort in terms of pursuing other actions is to develop a midterm STS implementation plan. That's, again, the statewide transportation strategy. And that's really a big theme within the executive order overall, is looking at ways to implement the statewide transportation strategy, not only by ODOT, but also the other four agencies listed here: Department of Land Conservation and Development, Department of Energy, and Department of Environmental Quality. Those agencies have been meeting for the last 6 months, and we've come up with a joint work program of preliminary actions to pursue in the next 2 years. We recognize, though, that this is a long-term effort, and these are only the tip of the spear in terms of the types of actions that we'll be pursuing in the short term. We've dubbed that initiative Every Mile Counts. We have information on our website and are currently accepting public comments on that effort. So I'll drill in a little bit more to some of the major work efforts by the Department of Transportation as outlined in the executive order. The first of which is the Transportation Electrification Infrastructure Needs Analysis, which we lovingly refer to as TINA. This effort is really to look across the state of Oregon and figure out what charging needs we have for electric vehicles. We're primarily going to focus on light-duty vehicles because we're charged with trying to help achieve the goals in Senate Bill 1044, passed by the Oregon legislature a few years ago. We also will be looking primarily at equity issues, so really understanding what are the barriers for all people to access charging. Are there income barriers? Are there barriers for those who rent? Some of those kinds of topics. And then unique to some of the mitigation actions, which tend to focus on in urban areas, we'll be also paying special attention to charging needs in rural areas. We're seeing higher use of light trucks and SUVs in all parts of the state now, making electric vehicles a more viable option for more rural parts of our state. So we'll be paying particular attention to rural areas as well and how we can enable charging there. To do this work, we will hire a consultant and we'll form an advisory committee. The advisory committee will include representatives from other state agencies, as well as utilities, the private sector, and more. We plan to have at least 3 meetings with this group, and these meetings will be open to the public and we'll have time allotted for public testimony. Information will be provided on our website once we get this work up and running in a couple months. We need to finish this report by June 30th of 2021. And I want to talk a little bit about how this relates to other efforts. So I mentioned earlier the statewide transportation strategy, and it's really a mix of actions. And this action required in the executive order is just one of many that we need to pursue to look at better vehicle and fuel efficiency and to achieve a cleaner future. So there's a number of ongoing works that we're looking at leveraging and combining this work with to have an efficient and strategic approach. There are several statewide committees of state agencies and utilities in the private sector that are working collaboratively together on actions. And that we know that once we complete this study and report, that there'll be other things that we need to pursue. I did mention every mile counts earlier, and again, that's the statewide implementation of the statewide transportation strategy by the 4 state agencies I mentioned earlier. There are actions within that complement this, such as a zero emission vehicle action plan, in which the infrastructure needs analysis will be one input into in terms of agency actions. And then there'll be other pieces as well. Clean Fuels Program is directed in the executive order, and work by DEQ on looking at cleaner options for freight transportation and heavy trucks. The second big work area directed in the executive order is around adding a greenhouse gas lens to project selection, particularly paying attention to our statewide transportation improvement program, or STIP. So the STIP is where we make our major project decisions. All our large projects go into the STIP, and we now have to consider those impacts of those projects in greenhouse gas emissions. We have a report due June 30th, 2021, similar to the electrification. However, we know that there's going to be decisions made before then, and we want to make sure that we're providing information to help support those and really bring that consideration into fruition sooner rather than later. So the Transportation Commission, starting in summer and fall of this year, will be looking at how it programs funding between certain programs like Fix-It, safety, and multimodal investments. And what we'll be doing is looking at, do those different options increase emissions? Do they keep them relatively flat, or do they decrease emissions? And we'll be providing that information along with other important outcomes that the Commission and agency considers. Again, such as health, equity, safety, and the environment is one of those important lenses as well. So it's a balance across those topic areas. This work effort we plan to pair with what I mentioned earlier, the STS midterm implementation plan, and that will be on the next slide where I explain that a little bit more. But what relates from that effort to the requirement in the executive order is that we're not only planning on looking at the STIP and the investment decisions there. We have many other multimodal investment programs where we can consider priorities, we consider how projects are funded in support of helping to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and look at the pieces overall. So the end objective in this lens that we're adding to project selection is to, as a whole, where we can, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, or at least not increase them. Lastly, our big effort is the statewide transportation strategy midterm implementation plan. You may ask, why a midterm implementation plan? We're calling it that because it's the second iteration of an ODOT action plan for the STS. We created one in 2014, the year following completion of the STS, and now this is our second plan. So this is the midterm of the 2050 horizon for the statewide transportation strategy. So these are things that we do plan to do immediately and look into. We'll be developing this plan over the next 6 to 8 months, trying to complete something by early 2021. We'll be sharing information with the Oregon Transportation Commission and having several check-in points with them. And we also plan to engage stakeholders on this effort. As we look towards things to do, we'll look within the categories identified in the statewide transportation strategy. So vehicles and fuels, like I mentioned earlier. We'll take the work and results from electrification needs analysis to figure out what electrification implementation programs we need to pursue and how we need to form partnerships with folks like utilities. We'll look at pricing programs. So again, as I mentioned in the previous slide, we'll look at our investment programs beyond the STIP to see how we can adapt the transportation system to climate change, as well as try to reduce our emission reduction profile. We'll look towards pricing programs like the Origo or vehicle miles traveled fee, value pricing and tolling options. So there's a number of things we can consider within each of these categories. Also included on this side is information from Every Mile Counts, that multi-agency work. So there are other things that complement these efforts that we'll be looking again at leveraging. For the operation of the system, we'll look at our construction and maintenance practices, because we not only want to look at how the transportation system is built, but how we build it and what the carbon footprint is of the Department of Transportation overall, and trying to reduce emissions there. Following on the COVID pandemic and the proof of concept of broad scale telecommuting across the state and within the Oregon Department of Transportation, we'll be looking for ways to continue that longer term to reduce demand on the transportation system, working with employers closely. And then we'll be looking at how can we support investments in low and no emission modes like biking, walking, and public transportation. And then lastly, linking up transportation and land use policies, recognizing the clear nexus between those types of actions, supporting local planning that may be required by the Land Conservation and Development Commission and our sister agency, Department of Land Conservation and Development. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Crook to go over some of the adaptation strategies.
Thanks, Amanda. So as you kind of introduced, the Climate Office is the agency's lead on adaptation, which is all about reducing the vulnerability and increasing the resilience of the transportation system from the impacts of extreme weather and climate change. And some examples of adaptation might be upsizing a culvert or protecting bridges from higher flood flows. This could also be increasing maintenance in more vulnerable areas. So our work through the Climate Office really helps support the agency's mission to provide a safe and reliable transportation system. Beyond GHG reduction alone, though, Executive Order 2004 also directs agencies to consider and integrate climate change impacts into agency decision making. And our work going forward is going to be really focused on this point. How do we take the information and integrate it into our strategies and how we work across the agency? Ultimately, we really want to be more proactive and less reactive in how we prepare and respond to these hazards. Next slide. Next slide, please. So what are some of the impacts that we're expecting? There's been a series of climate assessment reports that were generated out of Oregon State University, and they've consistently pointed to the same set of climate stressors that have impacts to transportation. These include changes in rainfall, such as more frequent or intense rainfall events that can trigger damaging runoff, flooding, erosion on roadways, and extreme storms can also create more landslides and rockfalls that damage enclosed roads. On the coast, larger storms and higher sea levels are projected to bring more storm surge and coastal erosion and landslides. And higher temperatures and drought can lead to damaging heat and wildfires, which leads to extended road closures to fix debris and down trees and destabilize slopes, which impacts travel across the state. And we've seen this every summer for the last 10 years now. So we're already dealing with these hazards and impacts today, but they are projected to become more frequent and get worse with climate change. Next slide. So the Climate Office partners with others across the agency to conduct climate change related research, risk assessments, and pilot studies. This work helps to provide actionable information around the science, the tools, and the best practices for improving resilience. Our partners have included our region project teams, our maintenance and operations staff, and our various asset programs, such as our Unstable Slopes program, which manages landslides and rockfalls. We also partner with others outside the agency, such as with the Federal Highway Administration and with several other state agencies on this issue. Examples of some of our past work include an adaptation strategy for the agency, which was a high-level look at all of our programs and the climate risks, and several studies on the Oregon coast, including a vulnerability assessment pilot which included a look at sea level rise and what the future impacts might be on the highway systems. So we've been learning a lot more as we go along, and we've been building off these prior efforts. Next slide. So what do we have upcoming? This year, we are partnering with our ODOT research unit and stakeholders on the Oregon coast for a comprehensive erosion hazard risk assessment for US 101. So this will be looking up and down the coast from Astoria all the way down to Brookings at all of these areas that are currently at risk and other areas that may be at risk in the future from higher sea level rise. And the project will be prioritizing these hotspots and informing the timing and options we have for how we address these hazards. This information will also potentially inform changes to state land use policy regarding shoreline armoring for coastal infrastructure. The other big effort we have kicking off this year is what we like to call our adaptation roadmap. And this is a statewide risk assessment and implementation plan. We'll be working with a consultant to engage across the agency to better understand current risks and where and how we can best address these. We plan to hold workshops in each of our 5 regions and share findings, gather input, and help prioritize actions. The most important outcome of this roadmap is going to be identifying the projects, programs, and investments that are needed to make the system more resilient into the future. Next slide. So shifting gears now, we also manage the sustainability program for ODOT. This program has been active within the agency for over 15 years. It focuses on integrating sustainable practices into agency operations. So we have a sustainability plan, and we track and report on performance measures and lead new initiatives across the agency. Some of our key focus areas are listed here, several of which support our climate goals around GHG reduction. For energy efficiency, we have a partnership with the Energy Trust of Oregon on what's called strategic energy management. And that's really focused on working with staff and the facility managers across the agency to improve energy efficiency in all of our buildings. For fleet, we have a lot of vehicles and we use a lot of fuel. So our fleet services group has done a great job being a leader across the state in using alternative fuels such as biodiesel and renewable diesel. We track and report on water use reductions and conservation actions across the state. And we also report on our materials management and recycling through both procurement activities and our operations, including construction and maintenance. We are also the lead for the Oregon Solar Highway Program. And we have 2 sites up near Portland that's a partnership with the Portland General Electric, and they manage and maintain those sites for us. Okay, with that, I'd like to open it up for questions, and I'll pass it back to Tom to cover anything we got through Slido.
All right, thanks so much, Jeff. I'll turn the camera back on here. So we did have some questions that have come through Slido, and I am going to retrieve the presenter role here, and then I'm going to share my content, which is going to be the Slido interface here. If I can just find that one, hang on. All right, there we go. So the first question, which had 8 upvotes to it, is how will this office support the funding of walking and biking infrastructure? Who would like to tackle that one?
Sure, I can take that on. So a question near and dear to my heart as a former active transportation manager for the agency. So glad to hear this question. As all of you know, biking and walking are zero emission modes. So they play a key role in helping to reduce, especially for short trips and in urbanized areas. So that will be one of the things that we start to look at within the suite of opportunities for reducing emissions is how can we fund some of these low and no emission modes, such as biking and walking. So in more recent years, we put a little bit more funding towards state transportation, biking and walking opportunities. And I think we need to look at how we can help support the local infrastructure and more on the statewide system as well.
Next question, what role do you see public transit playing in the state's climate change strategy?
So sure, I'll start on that one, and then Brian Hurley, if you have anything you'd like to add on that, I'd love you to jump on as well. So public transportation is one of the key opportunities to reduce emissions in the state. It's a key aspect of the statewide transportation strategy, but we're also calling for pretty substantial increases in public transportation services, on the order of magnitude of a 4 to 6 time increase what we have today. So for comparison purposes, the Statewide Transportation Investment Fund, or STIF, that came out of House Bill 2017, added funding to public transportation, and that basically keeps us even with population growth. It's not really increasing services, so we still have more work to do there. It's an important strategy. Brian, any other comments?
Thank you, Amanda. I don't have much to add other than transit is a great way for people who are interested in climate reduction to advocate for it at your local level. So, thank you.
So next question, within the ODOT org chart, where is the Office of Climate, or the Climate Office?
Sure. The Climate Office is located within the operations group. So there's now 4 assistant directors within the agency. There's operations, finance, equity, and government and communications, government relations and communications. So we're within the operations group. So that was done purposely to be able to connect better with what was once the highway division, now operation and delivery division, and all the multimodal aspects of the agency. So active transportation, public transportation, it's really tying to the system needs, which is one of our greatest opportunities to reduce emissions. So my office and I report directly to Cooper Brown, who's the assistant director there.
All right, thanks, Amanda. Next question, how will the GHG lens on the statewide transportation improvement program selection process work in relation to current criteria? Does that make sense, Amanda?
Yeah, sure. And I'll give a brief answer, but also turn it over to Mr. Crook to see if he has anything to add. So there are certain things that we look at today to help us make our investment decisions. We often rely on our statewide management system. So we have management systems for bridge and for pavement, which tell us about the condition of our roadways. It helps us to prioritize areas that we need to address, and it helps us to understand the implications of not investing. So that work will still all feed into how we make decisions. We're also building a management system for biking and walking to understand those needs and get those into the hopper. And greenhouse gas is one lens that we're then adding to that to say, okay, what is the impact of some of those decisions as those management systems feed in, and as we balance other needs like preserving the system, critical safety issues, and really understanding what the impacts are in the system. Jeff, anything to add?
That was great. Thank you.
All right. Here's the next question. Why not look at heavy duty vehicles? This person indicates that data shows they have substantial impact on greenhouse gas emissions.
Right. So folks that are interested, our statewide transportation strategy, which you're able to access online, shows the emission profile by different sectors of transportation. And freight by far is one of the largest sectors for greenhouse gas emissions behind light vehicles. And it's one of the harder ones to try to reduce emissions in. So to date, that hasn't been an area we've focused necessarily, but it is one that we recognize that we'll need to. So as the multi-agencies were working on the Every Mile Counts initiative, that was one thing we took into consideration, especially for vehicles and fuels. So a couple of things that we're looking at there. For the movement of goods on our roadways, so truck travel by freight, we're going to look at what the most promising low carbon options are for that freight movement. So can we resort to cleaner fuels? Is there opportunity to electrify more of that fleet? We're seeing more of the larger freight truck producers coming out with models that are electric and increasing the range of those vehicles. There's also hydrogen fuel cells and other technology that we're exploring. So one of the work efforts is figuring out what has the greatest potential, where are there opportunities for investment, and what are the pros and cons of those, so that we are looking at that piece. Our sister agency, Department, is to bring in more freight vehicles to the Clean Fuels program and help to support carbon reductions there as well. And I think there's other opportunities to work with our freight communities and partners and really understand what their business needs are, see how we can support them in carbon reductions and really things that make a good business sense to them and support their business as well.
All right, thanks, Amanda. So this next question, the Oregon Transportation Commission adopted the STS in 2018. How did it inform or impact the 21-24 STIP that the OTC will adopt later this year?
Yeah, great question. I think this is an area that we have to work on. I think that's why we saw the requirement within the executive order is to more explicitly have that greenhouse gas reduction lens on the projects that we select, because it wasn't necessarily as explicit before as it should have been. We've traditionally used information from the statewide strategy to help inform our policies and our other state plans and some of the ways that we fund different programs. And so it's influenced in those kind of ways, but probably not as directly as some of the project decisions that have been made to date. But we do plan to provide as much information as we can as decisions are made between now and that June 30th deadline next year, when we have to figure out our methodology, because we recognize that these projects are in the future and that we want to try to influence them as soon as we can. So we'll be looking at ways. We know it's not going to be perfect starting out, but we do want to try to at least provide some minimal level of information to help us get to better decisions.
All right. So is the Climate Office interested in advocating for a change in impact measures for land use to consider vehicle miles traveled? Perhaps per capita, I don't know what HH is, or employee.
Right. So I would assume HH means household. So per capita, per household, or per employee. I think that is something that we've looked at. Folks that have had a chance to look at the every mile count preliminary work. One of the goal areas that we've identified there is reducing vehicle miles traveled per capita. But we've been fairly careful to look at the suite of options to reduce emissions. As I talked about earlier in the presentation, that vehicles and fuels are a key part to reducing emissions, but not the only way to reduce emissions. There's everything, there's a number of other things that we need to also employ. So vehicle miles traveled is one piece of that pie, but not the only. So we want to be careful not to focus too much solely on that, recognizing it is a big factor, and we're already starting to put that out in some of our objectives of our work.
So the next question, what role do you view the MPOs, the Metropolitan Planning Organizations, and the area commissions on transportation, their role in addressing climate in their local regions, and will they have to put on a climate lens in their ranking as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. Great thoughts. I think this is something that we're starting to figure out over time. So one of the requirements in the executive order I mentioned a little bit earlier was that the Land Conservation and Development Commission will be considering how metropolitan areas and cities and counties will need to consider that greenhouse gas reduction lens. So within the transportation planning rule and the regulations, there'll be ways that they're looking at making that more formalized. So we'll have to see the outcome of that work, and ODOT will be working with our sister agency on that effort. But in general, yes, I think the idea is not to just look within our own agency, but to help the state as a whole figure out ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to adapt to climate change. So we'll be working with our metropolitan planning organizations and local partners on ways that we can do that and collaborate together. And then for area commissions on transportation, I think as we figure out their evolving role in making decisions, I think climate change will need to be a lens in which they consider decisions. So as we talk about how projects are selected in the STIP, One thing is the types of how money is put into different programs, like I talked about earlier, but the other is a selection of projects. And we want to be able to provide the right information when decisions are being made. So as area commissions play an important role in helping inform those decisions, the climate change lens will need to be added into those conversations and balanced against those other important goals.
All right, thanks. Will you be championing technical solutions to reduce emissions, like building roundabouts instead of signals, staffing to improve signal timing, manage the intelligent traffic systems, transportation systems that we have?
Right. I think one of the categories I didn't talk a lot about earlier is our operations and making the system more efficient. So there will be things that we'll look at within intelligent transportation systems, such as just speed smoothing out there, reducing stops and starts, and trying to reduce emissions from that. Looking at our signal timing, giving potentially preference to transit so that the transit times are reduced and people may be more interested in taking public transportation. So there's a number of things that we'll look at on the system perspective. And again, we'll balance that with other goals. So roundabouts may be appropriate in some situations, depending on the traffic flow, safety considerations and others, and may have additional greenhouse gas reduction benefits. So it really is, as we make decisions on our system, it's about the co-benefits and it's about the balancing across those things.
All right, and will this webinar be available after today? Is it being recorded? I can answer that question, yes and yes. We are recording the presentation, and I am anticipating we will put it up on our YouTube channel, and you can check back with the Climate Office, and they can send you a link to that later on. So there you go. What role do you see expanding e-bikes and bicycle transportation for the 50% of vehicle trips that are less than 3 miles in Oregon?
Great. So I'll ask Mary to help me out a little bit on this question. But I think as we talked about the electrification needs analysis and infrastructure, we'll be focusing on light vehicles, but we'll also give consideration to other modes of transportation, whether that's freight or whether that's micromobility like biking and walking. And so electric bikes, electric scooters have that potential for those short trips, but also we've seen a potential for a little bit longer trips, that they're actually increasing the range that people are willing to commute by biking or by scooter by having those vehicles electric. Mary?
Yeah, I think, can you hear me?
Substantial feedback there.
Yeah, I don't.
Mary, you're probably going to turn to probably mute your speakers is probably what you're going to have to do here in order to speak. It's feeding back from your speakers into the microphone.
I think it's not working.
Looks like we may not be able to get Mary, although if you want, Mary, at the bottom of your screen, you could go to the little 3-dot menu and go to audio connection, and you can choose the call-in feature. And I think that'll probably solve your problem in case we have more questions for you. But let's go ahead and move to the next question, if that's okay. We'd love to hear more about how ODOT will be operationalizing this effort within the department. How will you bring the different stakeholder groups together?
Yeah, great question. So ODOT is a large organization. We have over 4,500 employees, and we have very different departments across the group. So one of the ideas, and as was alluded to in one of the earlier questions, is how is the agency organized around the Climate Office? And we're in the operations group. So that's one way, is really trying to tie us to the system and all modes of transportation, so that we're able to efficiently and effectively work across the different modes of transportation and work together. As we develop the statewide transportation strategy midterm implementation plan, we'll be meeting with all parts of the department to figure out what creative ideas folks have, to share with them ideas that the Climate Office or others may have raised, and to really vet what's viable, what's appropriate, how can we really do this work? And really, it's a collaboration. So again, the Climate Office is relatively small, but the idea is to really permeate all parts of the department and integrate this work into it. So it really requires the cooperation of multiple parts of the department working together collaboratively. So we'll be reaching out to folks, seeking agreement as we go forward and building those partnerships.
It looks like one of our attendees has a comment or a question. Elizabeth, I'm going to unmute you if you'd like to ask that.
Thank you. You had a couple things I was interested in, and I was wondering how to get more information, and I didn't know how to write a question. Employer reducing demand, and also having a link between land use and transportation as components, I think, of the TST, but I didn't hear about the details of what is being thought about at this time.
Okay, so I think I got the gist of the question. I'm sorry, it cut out a little bit on my end, but I think you were interested in a little bit more information on demand management approaches and how we're linking transportation and land use. So we are trying to keep our website up to date. So that's one place I would point folks to without spending a lot of time in the last few minutes of this webinar. I want to make sure we get to a few more questions, but we're trying to keep information up to date on there. We're also trying to link transportation and land use through our statewide policies and plans. We have a key partnership with the Department of Land Conservation and Development, and we're really working hand in hand with them on the relationship there. And for demand management, one of the programs I used to manage as the active transportation manager was our transportation options program, which is working with folks throughout the state, employers, on trying to reduce the demand on the system by telecommuting, by shifting time of day of work, by making people aware of other transportation options that are out there, and helping people understand how to ride the bus, how to access critical services. So there's a number of programs that are existing that we really plan to leverage off of.
All right, well, the next question is, what gives the GHG assessment of the STIP teeth? Does it have any? I read we're balancing GHG against other measures as we aren't going to do anything.
Sure. So I think at the end of the day, if we don't do anything different, then we've missed the mark. I think the objective here is to really look at that chart that I showed earlier that shows that we're way off target with the statewide transportation strategy vision, that we really need to reduce emissions. We've increased. There's a big gap between where we need to be. That said, we still need to balance. We can't do that at the expense of a critical safety project that we need to put in. And really what we're trying to get to is that across all our investments, not necessarily any one project, our objective is to reduce emissions where we can. So we are trying to get to something different. That doesn't mean that every single project will reduce emissions, but where we can, we're trying to achieve that outcome to have something that's different on the whole. And I think part of that work will be creating some accountability mechanisms and reporting back to the Transportation Commission and publicly on how we're doing that. So I think that's a key one to watch in the future.
Okay. Can you expand on the pricing element? Is that developing a cap and trade system in transportation, or exactly what?
Sure. So I think for ODOT's role in the pricing system, it looks different than a cap and trade or cap and reduce program. For those that are interested, I encourage you to look at the executive order. That's 2004 that the governor issued in March. And that requires Department of Environmental Quality to create a cap and reduce program, including over fuels. So there's more information that you can find on DEQ's website and in the executive order that speaks to that program. For Department of Transportation's role, will be primarily around how we price and fund our transportation system. So right now we rely on the gas tax. A more effective pricing mechanism going forward is a vehicle miles traveled fee, or the ORIGO program, because that really is recouping the cost of the impact of everyone who drives on the system, no matter what type of vehicle they use. but it's also really important from the greenhouse gas reductions perspective because it's a visual signal to everyone on the impact of every mile they drive, much more so than some cost buried in the gas tax. Again, we'll also look at things like the value pricing program within the Portland metropolitan area. So congestion pricing, tolling are other options that we'll look at that send the price signal to folks. And in the Every Mile Counts initiative, we're partnering with DLCD again to look at parking management options and how pricing might play into the way that parking is managed and help to promote use of low and no emission modes.
I'm going to unmute Chris if you want to ask your question.
Yes, thanks. I have just a couple of questions. One is, what is taking priority, resilience or emissions?
Can you repeat the last part there, Chris?
Resilience, programs that improve resilience, or emissions reductions?
Resilience or emissions?
Priority.
Priority, okay.
Right. So I think the question was, what is taking precedence? Is it reducing emissions, or is it adapting to the changes of climate and extreme weather? And what I would say is, I think we recognize that we haven't done enough on the emission reduction side. So we are putting a fair amount of effort right now into looking at that. And that's really consistent with the governor's executive order and all the things required out of that. So we do have a significant focus of the office on the mitigation side. However, and as I talked about at the beginning of the presentation, we're seeing a real and dramatic effect of climate and extreme weather on our transportation system today. We really need to get a handle on understanding what those effects are and on addressing those, because it does cost Oregonians money and it affects people's ability to live their lives. So that is equally important and also a key focus area for us.
Okay, my next question. Are you coordinating any work with the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board? We are replacing undersized culverts and bridges about 3 per year. These used to be bridges. Any coordination with ODOT?
Okay, so you cut out a little bit. So the parts that I heard are really, are we coordinating with Oregon and Washington on some of these efforts? So yes, certainly within, in particular, certain topics like electric vehicles. Mary, who's on the line, but maybe perhaps not able to speak as well, has a key collaboration with all the Western states working on those topics. So there's partnerships that are existing, and there are partnerships that we're starting to form across broader topics as we get into other key strategies for adaptation and for mitigation beyond just the electrification and fuel market.
Let's go back to our questions on Slido. What are the latest performance data on Oregon surface transportation, GHG emissions, and vehicle miles traveled compared with the 1990 baseline? Is ODOT doing annual performance monitoring?
So for greenhouse gas emissions, we're not doing annual performance monitoring. We're looking at least every 5 years, if not every 2 years, starting here shortly to kind of track how we're doing relative to that. As I showed in an earlier slide, we saw an uptick in emissions from previous years and from 1990 levels. So we see that and anticipate that that's going to reduce in the future. We do track VMT, which is estimated on an annual basis, and that showed that per capita it's fairly flat, but our population has increased, so we've seen some increase overall in vehicle miles traveled in the state. But those are two measures we pay a lot of attention to see how we're doing on the greenhouse gas reduction front and on travel overall.
So for the statewide transportation improvement program, would ODOT consider a jurisdictionally blind approach, i.e. state and local, so that investments can be made that have the greatest impact on reducing vehicle miles traveled?
I think that's something that we can certainly have a dialogue with the Transportation Commission on. Again, I think what we're paying attention to is our management systems and the data there showing what the needs are across the transportation system. And of course, they're large. There's not enough money even to really sustain ODOTs in the state's transportation system, let alone local jurisdictions, which in some cases are in more dire straits than we are. But the need is equally great among the two. So I think there is not a lot of money to go around, but I think we have to consider how we use that effectively. So I think there's a number of options on the table to look at how we invest our limited resources.
Okay, final few questions here. How about a funding mechanism to implement the recommendations of electric vehicle infrastructure needs analysis and the STS more generally?
Right, so I think that's something as we're standing up the climate office that we're considering what our needs are. So we have some immediate budgetary needs where we are conducting the needs analysis, where we're working on adding the GHG lens to the STIP and hiring consultants to support those efforts. But once they're complete, that certainly should be leading to more work and more opportunities to really implement and realize the statewide transportation strategy vision. So we are looking at figuring out what the resource needs should be and making sure we're trying to set those aside. So that will be further conversations with leadership within the agency as well as the Transportation Commission to identify those needs and make sure that we're being proactive in trying to pursue those actions.
What role will this office have in collecting data on mode uses? Without this data, it's hard to demonstrate how much investment in bicycle and pedestrian helps.
Right, so there's some information that we collect today, and we're trying to expand that over time. So when I was the active transportation manager, we were looking at some good research studies to collect trip data within our metropolitan areas for making a correlation between investments in biking and walking facilities and increases or changes in numbers of people that utilize those modes. So there's a number of different things across the agency we're looking at. I think the climate office itself isn't necessarily pursuing this data given our limited resources at this time, but there are others that are working on it that we're collaborating with to try to collectively understand the impacts of these investments.
All right. Are these efforts alone expected to bridge the gap between to meet the sector's emissions reduction goals?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think no. It's a huge effort to try to reduce greenhouse gas emissions within the state. It requires collaboration among other state agencies, which we're really starting with the Every Mile Counts work. It requires actions within the authority of the Oregon Department of Transportation, which we'll be identifying here in the next several months. And these will just be really starting to get things underway to try to enable things like broader use of transportation electrification, to enable higher utilization of public transportation or biking, walking, but in and of themselves won't solve the greenhouse gas reduction problem. It really is market driven. It's the private sector, it's the Oregon legislature, it's the federal government. It's a number of entities that really do need to work together collaboratively to figure out this solution. State government plays an important role in that, and ODOT has an important charge to do something, and we plan to do our part, but we are one part in a bigger piece of efforts that need to be pursued.
So Amanda, will the office consider utilizing community benefit agreements to ensure transportation projects are inclusive and equitable for impacted communities?
Wow, okay. I think equity will be a big part of all the work that we do across the organization. I think that's evidenced by creating an assistant director level position for equity and really focused on that topic. So we need to look at how that permeates all parts of our business. I think how it permeates the work that we do within climate and recognizing the disparities that exist today, trying to target investments and emission reductions in communities that are underserved, like communities of color, like low income communities. So it really does need to permeate all that we do, including our investments and how projects are identified. So I think that's something that we're really starting to work on. I think we have more work to do, but we recognize that as something key to pursue in the future.
All right. So Oregon reduces the cost of driving by making it cheaper for gas guzzlers and peak period drivers to pay the same mile cost as EVs. Will ODOT reform Oregon?
So I don't want to speak too much to the Orgo program because my depth of knowledge is not super great there. But I would be happy to share that question with our Orgo program manager within the agency. I think in general, of course, we are looking at implementing the Orgo program more broadly and seeing what policies and approaches are effective for doing that. So I know there's a number of things that they're considering.
And I know, Amanda, originally the Orgo program, when it was designed to really test out, allowed lower per mile vehicles to actually get money back instead of paying just not paying the gas tax. But I know those are legislative changes have been made since then. So maybe folks can go to myorigo.org and you can learn some of the latest information about the Orgo program there. So Amanda, I'll turn it back over to you for final comments, and then we can let folks know that the webinar is being recorded, and it will be, we'll have a link to it on the climate change page, and you might want to talk about where that's located. I'll try and pull it up on the screen too. Back to you for final comments.
Great, thank you, Tom. Well, I appreciate everybody's time and joining us for this important conversation. I appreciate all the feedback and push that we get as an agency to do our work better and to figure out ways that we address this climate challenge and also balance our other important goals and objectives. So really thank you all for your time. Again, as Tom mentioned, the webinar will be placed on the ODOT website. So if you type in Google ODOT Climate Office, our website will be pulled up from there, and then we'll place a link to this webinar on the right-hand side of that, available for others that want to see. I would encourage you to look on that website and get to the Every Mile Counts work as well. We have a draft of the 2-year work plan across the multi-agencies and a survey instrument with that as well, so that if you have any public comments, you're certainly welcome to go there and leave your public comments. And if you have any other comments or questions, the final slide that I showed earlier has mine and my staff's contact information, which will also be available on the Climate Office website that Tom is showing here. And we look forward to a continued dialogue as we look for ways to engage you and others in these important conversations. Tom?
Yes, Amanda, Brian, Jeff, Mary, everybody, thank you so much for helping us to understand more about what the Climate Office is about. And thank all of you for joining us on this webinar today. And as Amanda said, I hope you can Google ODOT Climate Office, which is exactly what I did as you were saying it there, Amanda, and we're able to pull up that website. There's going to be a lot more information added there in the future. So that's it for us today, and I hope you all have a really good rest of your day today.
Thank you.